In this video, we get stuck into the scenics on the station approach and we turn it from this into this. Now, doesn't that look so much better? Hi, welcome back to Chadwick Model Railway. I'm Charlie, and today you join me on a sort of railway detailing day. And the area concerned is from the edge of the viaduct board right up to the start of the branch line station board. So what I need to do is work my way along this board, carrying out some ballasting, doing the vegetation, bushes, fields, the line side junk, the pallets, the cable drums, the cable troughing and all that kind of stuff that needs to go into this area. Right, let me just run you from one end up to the other. So this is the line we actually start from. Now I'm unsure about this signal box area, so unless something drastic happens, I'm going to leave this for another day. But this might not be the actual signal box we're going to use, but I need a signal box on a roadway coming in here, and then we'll have the fence running along here, delineating the sort of countryside to the railway. So this will be probably left for another day. Now, so as we work up, so there's a signal on order, or there will be by the end of today, to go in here. And this signal here is worth a mention. It's from Absolute Aspects and it's removable, similar to this one here. And as you can see, I can sort of pull it out if necessary. And you screw this plate underneath the baseboard at the right height to give you a surface mount on this sort of so-called concrete plinth. So what I've actually done with this one is I've put it in underneath and screwed it in, but I put blue tack around the outside so I can still pull it out. And I'm going to put ballast in and glue the ballast on, but I know if there's anything wrong, I know that I can actually get this out without doing any damage to it. It will pull straight out. It's connected back to a ribbon cable, and here's the little ribbon cable that comes down to a circuit board, and the cables then that run on to the SIG M20 to do the switching. Now moving along the board somewhat, we come up to the area where there's a few points including a double slip. Now I've threaded a couple of black cables, and these aren't 702, they're smaller, that's more of an equipment wire, but to replicate cables that are going to supply the dummy point motors which are going to go on both ends of this double slip. As you can also see, I have some cable troughing in already, but I need to ballast both behind and in front of the cable troughing to give it a bit of realism, and of course vegetation running along the foot of this wall. There's ballasting to be done, so there's this double slip, a couple of more points up there and 3 further down, and obviously this head shunt here needs to be ballasted. Obviously in this area here we've got some green to put in, how exciting. So we need to run all that in so it looks kind of disused but quite natural. But a walkway, I imagine, to come down towards the signal here. Moving on a little further, I've got to do something with this hillside to blend that in, but not until again I've done the ballasting of these 2 points and the points I mentioned earlier that run down into the goods yard. Now we've also got 2 other point motors that are the MP1s that I installed here because of the lack of room underneath, and somehow I need to do a little bit of camouflage here. So what I will probably do is paint them brown sort of to hide them, and then bush over them best I can. In this area here was probably going to go for a rough gravelly look with lots of weeds and that sort of stuff, and the same for this area here. And moving on down once more, we end up at the break for the branch line station. So we'll ballast these 3 points, but we will not do these. These are the lines that give the break between the 2 boards, and they also break here and here. So yes, I will ballast this one and that one down to those break points there, but I will leave this area unfinished, because obviously once this board is attached I can then put in these tracks on a sort of a semi-permanent basis, and we'll be kind of good to go. Over here at the far side there is a gap. Now, there's a radiator underneath, so what I will probably do is construct a piece of scenery to go over there, and then if in the winter time, if it's going to get really cold, I will turn that radiator back on and be able to pull out this panel rather than putting a huge amount of heat underneath these boards. I don't know if I'm kind of going over the top about it, but I think it's worth considering. And then obviously we've got some hillside to sort out here, and some rest of this sort of guff really. Gosh, exciting. So that's the task in hand. Now, it's coming up to 2:30 on a Monday. So what I intend to do now, by the end of today, is hopefully ballast all the points, all the track work, glue it, and that way overnight, it'll have a chance to dry. I don't know what time I'll finish. It could be finished by 6 o'clock, 8 o'clock, or whatever. It's of no consequence. But what I would like to do is get all this area ballasted and glued before I call it a day today. Now, I'm not going to film all the ballasting bits and bobs because you've seen it 1,000 times. What I will do is just film how I add the glue to my points, so that I avoid getting them snagged up. And if they do snag up, it's no big deal. You can add hot water, free the points from the PVA, and it'll all be good to go. People worry themselves to death about points, and it really, really isn't that difficult. Right, let's go and get some ballast. Now, we all have our preferences, and I use, for this sort of basic stuff, is Woodland Scenics Fine Ballast Grey Blend. Not medium, but fine. A lot of people seem to think that fine is for N gauge. It isn't. Fine looks absolutely fine for 00. So I would always go to fine. I've made this mistake in the past of using medium, and it is used elsewhere on the layout. But there we go. This is a fine ballast, and it's a grey blend, so it doesn't look all the same and all a bit naff. So that way it gives you some kind of structure to the ballast, and it looks more interesting. So here we are coming on to the last point. Now, I tend to use isopropyl alcohol 99% instead of water, because this stuff will evaporate much quicker, therefore it will dry that much quicker. Now, the point blades are set in the middle. They're not one way or the other, they're just in the middle. So that way, if they sort of glue together, if they sort of glue fast, I can move them either way. The blades won't actually stick to the stock rails. So that's the way I do it. And like most people, all I do is just bring the glue along up to the sleeper before the switch rail, and again coming on the other way. Easy. And then coming down here, sticking clear of the switch rail. The PVA mix is 50-50 water and PVA with a few drops of washing up liquid in it, or as they say stateside, I think they call it dish soap, which breaks the surface tension and helps the glue to drain through the ballast. So just keep doing this until the glue stays on the surface. Now, I must confess, there is another video that I've done on this called speed ballasting, and here should be a link to it. I'll also put it at the end of this film, because with that method there you can see exactly how I do it, and to be perfectly honest, it really is no big shakes. So there I am, there's my point blades still in there, and yes, there's going to be glue on them, but rest assured, when I come back in a couple of hours time and give them a shake, and then a couple of hours after that, and then in the morning when I come in and give them a shake and then drive the point motors, I'll make sure there's no bits of ballast in there, and it will be fine. Trust. That's what we need. Well, as usual, it's now the following day. Now, I finished laying the glue at around about 8 o'clock yesterday evening, and I came up at 9 o'clock with a little bit of blue roll and pulled off some of the excess around the switch blades, and I did the same about 10 o'clock and then give them all a twiddle, both electrically and sort of manually. A couple of disadvantage with the old Cobalts and the MTP point motors is you can't put the point blades in the middle, because you can't move these point motors unless you apply power, whereas with the tortoise point motors you can, as long as power isn't applied, you can physically move them, hence the advantage of putting the point blades in the center. But there we are. Anyway, I've flashed the layout up, so it's now a time to work our way along these points and check to see if they're okay. Now this is the one from last night, and let's see how much of encouragement it needs to free. So you can see the point blades are in the middle, and then all I tend to do is give it a little bit of a shove, and lo and behold, we're there. And it's as simple as that, really. I don't get too worked up too much about the fear. Now this is point 10, so let's see if we can change this now electrically. Point 10, throw it. No, it's probably already thrown. Close. Okay, so there's a small gap here now, so there's obviously a little bit of gravel in there, and on the thrown side it's a little bit, it's fine, but on the closed side there's a little bit in there, so I just need to go in there and give it a little bit of a scrape. And we're there. Now it is worth mentioning that this ballast is still reasonably moist, so I can't really do a great deal. It's going to take at least another day for this ballast to dry out, so I just do have to tread carefully. But as you can see, the point works just fine. Now let's have a quick look at this hillside. Now I must confess, I don't really recall how I ended up with this bare patch, but I thought, well, we can start with, if I work at the back coming forward, I'm not going to sort of break anything with my belly as I lean across. So what I thought I would do, as it's a bit of a sort of a steep area, is I would cover it with the same covering as I've used on the field, and then break it up with bushes and scrub. Neat PVA always sort of does the trick. I always like to go, I over-engineer for a living, to be perfectly honest. I always seem to put too much strength into almost everything I build, whether it be baseboards or whatever. And this is Woodland Scenics Fine Turf Burnt Grass T1344. Now to put this hillside in place, I'm using a product that's known as Sticks Like. It used to have a different name, but I'm sure you can guess what the last word was. And this is a trade adhesive, and it sticks within 15 minutes. Now to cover this hillside, I'm using Woodland Scenics Plaster Cloth C1203. And clearly having the water around here is not without risk, so I've put a blanket down, and then hopefully we can put this on without making a complete mess and ruining the back scene. Keep it away from the back scene. Now I'm applying some brown just in case we chip the scenic grass kind of area, because it's not too bad if you see some brown shining through, but obviously this white will be very, very stark and in your face. And these are the ready mix paints from Hobbycraft. They're £1 a pop, so good little cheap bargain really. Now before I put the paint away, I took the opportunity in painting these MP1 point motors with a little bit of that brown to dull them down prior to them becoming bushes. Now going through boxes, you discover that you've bought several things several times, let's say, and dummy point motors is something that I've fallen foul of. But comparing the Pico ones to the Westhill wagon version is quite interesting, because as you can see here, the Pico ones do look somewhat primitive, whereas the ones from Westhill Wagon Works clearly are much more refined. Anyway, I've installed a couple down the other end. So we've installed one here as the line splits to go from platform 1 to platform 2 in the goods, but also with the double slip. And I've run a few cables around, as you can see. Now I've glued the cables down with hot glue, but the trouble is the glue still shines underneath. So whereas they do look pretty nifty, they are going to leave a little bit of matte varnish over the top. But I think they really are a great improvement on the Pico ones, which obviously have been around for absolutely donkey's years. So I need to install a few more of these and then take a look at their respective relay cabinets. Now relay boxes, or to give them their correct name, relay cabinets I believe, are a strange old thing really, because on the real railway they appear in various guises. You can have one on its own, they might come in a pair. Here at Yeovil Pen Mill they seem to have just sort of grown, and again at Castle Carey all sorts of cabinets just sort of appear. But why is that? Well, I suppose it must be that the way the railway evolves. So what am I going to do? Well, the line side equipment that needs power must be signals, automatic warning system, point motors, all that kind of stuff need power. So it makes sense to install your cabinets adjacent to something that will draw power. So that's exactly what I'm going to do here on Chadwick. So here we have one of those Westhill Wagon Works point motors on this particular point here. Oh, and there is a link in the Show More tab to get to these, because they are clearly a vast improvement on the old Pico ones. Anyway, I've run the cables back into this bit of cable troughing and installed a little platform on which to put our nifty little relay box. And these are made by Pico and also Westhill Wagon Works, so it's certainly worth doing a little bit of research. And then all I'm going to do with this is using a bit of super glue, that's the Rocket Rapid I use, is to glue this in place. I don't weather them before I kick off. I think I tend to always install sort of pristine, and then when you get the sort of the big picture is to do the weathering in a one or afterwards. And here's a little tip, I don't know if you're aware of this, but keep your super glue in the fridge, because it doesn't sort of clog the nozzle up. It stays much more it stays much more fluid in the fridge, and you don't get the sort of blocked nozzle syndrome, as it were. Right, just another few to go. And these two are of different heights, just to add a little more interest. Lovely. And we've also another one to do down here on the main line. Lovely. Now, whilst we've got the old super glue out, we ought to think about installing some AWS ramps. That's the automatic warning system. But where should you place them? Well, they would go before a signal. So if a train comes across and you need the alarm to go off in the cab, then the AWS will trigger the alarm and hopefully you stop before the next signal. So they need to go 200 or 300 meters before the signal. Now, model railways aren't like that really, are they? Because we have problems with the compression of scale. So I'm going to install a few in various points around this area. Now, in the fullness of time, I'm going to install a signal where this little orange dot is. So when we come right back towards the helix, I need to find a spot for the ramp. So what I'm going to do is stick the ramp in where you see the super glue bottle. And the reason I'm popping it in here is because it's of the adequate distance from that signal, but also it's adjacent to the relay boxes, which would naturally provide it with power. And obviously this is the up line, so the ramp goes in that direction. Similarly, we have one at the top of the down line. And one at the entrance to the branch line area. Now, a couple of weeks ago I was doing some filming over at DCC Train Automation, and I bumped into a guy by the name of Dan Everson who was doing some scenics for one of the layouts that James was building. Now, I can't help but deny it, I was quite impressed with the way that Dan does his line side sort of greenery. So I thought I'd show you how he does it with his PVA and dots it around to sort of break it up so it's not too uniform, and also uses various sprinklings of foliage to give it a more natural look. And I thought, in for a penny, in for a pound. I'm fair game at stealing someone else's technique, so let's give it a go. Now, I did ask Dan if it was okay for me to use his technique, and he was most willing, so I'm going to use it between these two sets of relay boxes. And the commodities I'm going to use are blended turf green blend, blended turf earth blend, and fine turf burnt grass. So I'll put my dots on and have a little sprinkle. Okay. And then finally I've got some Woodland Scenics light green bushes, which I'll pop a little bit in. And then finally a couple of forest green bushes, just to break it up a little bit. Now, I am quite impressed with the way this has gone, though I have yet to hit it with a vacuum cleaner to take away the loose stuff. I've had a little line side hut that obviously needs some sorting out and some weathering and some people and the rest of it, and the odd bush around at the end of the buffer stop and down here. I also want to install a cess along here, which is a walkway in the old days, as it were, where permanent way staff used to walk along with sledgehammers and hammer the wedges into track and that sort of maintenance. But in the meantime, what I'm going to do is green up this area here with a couple of base colours, and then add in some bushes and clump foliage as if it's growing up this wall. So to that end, I shall just coat this in neat PVA, sprinkle some on, and then add the major clumps. Now, once again, I've coated it with neat PVA, and I'm going to try and sprinkle it with something else this time, which is Woodland Scenics Coarse Turf Earth T60, to give it a kind of a darker feel. So, you know, more of a sort of, you know, scrubland kind of feel. So we'll try and give it some of this. Now, it's a little bit more lumpy than I thought it would be. So I'm now going to sprinkle in some of the finer stuff. Now, whilst we're waiting for that to dry, you can see that I've already applied some scenic material to this area here that we painted yesterday. Now, what I'm going to do is add some of the blended turf over this to kind of break it up a bit and give it a bit more colour. And then I shall spray this with a scenic cement to lock these other fibres in. But otherwise it tends to look a little bit too uniform, as it were. I want to add these bushes to give it a sort of a more depth to it, more of a three-dimensional feel. And this is just old clump foliage that I've had left over from previous projects, really. Now, for the areas between the tracks that run up towards the branch line station, we've obviously got some sort of spare, redundant, derelict areas. This one here runs up to the ramp, and this one then runs right back up to the other end. But what do we do with them? Well, to me, it's sort of a neglected area. So what I intend to do, as I've done here, as I use this ballast here, which is a thin dark ballast to give me both contrast in colour and of scale, and then I can run this back up here and up there. So I paint these two areas with 50-50 PVA and water mix, and then sprinkle this stuff on top, obviously then hoover up once it's dry. And then we can then add the sort of areas of neglect with weeds and grasses growing through, and then litter it with pallets, rail, track, and other sort of redundant railway detritus. And then we can come back later on with a vacuum cleaner with a stocking over one end, hoover up the excess, and of course reuse it. Now the time has come to run a vacuum cleaner over this area and take off any excess, and hopefully not all of it. So let's have a go. Well, that was quite successful. Most of it's stayed on, and it gives it a sort of irregular pattern, doesn't it? It's not all the same. Dan, you're a clever man. Now, to lock in these areas along here, I'm going to spray it with the old Woodland Scenic cement, and it should lock in all these fibres, so they shouldn't sort of get vacuum cleaned off the next time I have a go. Now, I mentioned earlier about constructing a cess, and that's C-E-S-S, and it was a walkway for permanent way staff to walk along the track and do the repairs, you know, bang in the wedges on the track and all that sort of thing. Now, hopefully you can see from this image, on the left-hand side, there is a thin walkway, perhaps made of very thin gravel, because obviously your permanent way staff aren't going to want to stumble around on ballast. And I tried before with a very thin ballast to try to construct a cess, with miserable results, let's say. Anyway, I have a new plan, and that is using chinchilla sand. Now, I used this in a ballast video a couple of years ago perhaps. This is Tiny Friends Farm, Harry, Charlie and Jerry chinchilla bathing sand. A bag of this is £5. That's all it is from your local pet store. Now, what I thought of doing was, with a thicker PVA mix, is to paint a line along the top where I want the ballast to stick, and then apply the chinchilla sand and see if it works. Anyway, let's give it a go. So here's the cunning plan then, to paint on a very thin area. This isn't the best brush. Right, to paint on, try this, a thin area which I can get that ballast to take. Now, I've decanted some of the chinchilla sand into this little jar, so hopefully now when I sprinkle this along, let's try to do it so you can see. And if of course this works, I can then replicate it on the rest of my railway. Well, as you can imagine, this scene has now changed no end, so take a look at this little piece of footage. Now, hopefully you found that little bit of footage inspiring, and I haven't even done the speed restriction signs. I haven't even put the clutter that I mentioned in the first place, but it's really coming along, and we'll save all that for another video. Anyway, in the meantime, what I'm doing, I'm chasing 100,000 subscribers, so please don't forget to hit the subscriber button. There's the patrons button, and please give us a thumbs up, and I'll see you in 2 weeks' time. Thanks a lot. Take care. Bye-bye.